Good evening. Welcome to PNP Live. My name is Margaret Orto, and I'm the events coordinator in the Children and Teens Department of Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening, and I'm delighted to welcome our guests, Gayle Forman, in conversation with Rebecca Stead, to celebrate the publication of Frankie and Bug, Gayle's first superbly written middle grade novel.
Yay! Thank you, Margaret.
Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. Just wanted to note that we do have closed captioning available for the event tonight. You can click on the live transcript at the bottom of your screen and then select show subtitle if you'd like that option. Also, you can click the link we will drop in the chat to get your own copy of Frankie and Bug. We have signed book plates and bookmarks while supplies last. And then lastly, if you have a question for our guest tonight, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions you like and want answered. So now on to the event you're waiting for. Gayle Forman is an award-winning author and journalist. Her young adult novel, If I Stay, was a #1 New York Times bestseller and has been translated into more than 40 languages. It was also released as a blockbuster movie in 2014. Her most recent YA novel is We Are Inevitable. She has also written 2 novels for adults, and her essays and nonfiction work have appeared in publications like the New York Times, Elle, The Nation, and Time. As mentioned, Gayle has now successfully entered the middle grade space with Frankie and Bug, and we're so glad she did. In conversation with Gayle tonight is author Rebecca Stead, whose novels for children include her most recent, The List of Things That Will Not Change, published in 2020, Liar and Spy, winner of the 2013 Guardian Children's Fiction Award and a New York Times Book Review notable book for children. And of course, When You Reach Me, which was awarded the 2010 Newbery Medal, among many other accolades. And now I'm delighted to turn the event over to them. Take it away.
Yay.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank
Yay,
you,
politics and prose. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Gayle. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm supposed to be here. I know we're not supposed to be. You know, I'm going to be talking about your books too, because I'm such a huge fan, and I feel like they were influential in me in terms of writing middle grade.
Well, hey, actually, that was my first question for you. Well, first I wanted to say, yay, welcome to middle grade. A fantastic and loving corner of the kid lit world, in my opinion. I hope that you've been feeling that way. And I just sort of wanted to know, you know, you're a beloved, successful, beautiful writer of young adult books. And did you have sort of a long burning desire to write middle grade, or is this something that kind of popped up recently?
You know, it's funny, nobody's asked me that. And it didn't pop up recently. It popped up in 2013, which was when I got the idea and I started writing this book, like January of 2013. And it took really 8 years for the book to find its way. I mean, 7 years for me to write it and 8 years for it to find its way to where we are now. And I'm trying to think, like, if I ever did try and write a middle grade. And at one point I did with my daughter. She wanted to, when she was like 7 or 8, where she was like, I want you to write a book called Just an Ordinary Girl. And it's about a girl who's, and I don't even remember the specifics of it, but I sat down to write it and I found like it was so labored. I couldn't figure out the voice at all. But when the idea for Frankie and Bug came to me, which was like on a long flight home where I had run out of reading material and I had a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on my phone because my daughter was reading it for her school. And so I reread it for the first time in a long time and loved the children, as I always do, but sort of started thinking about how much things have changed and how much they have not changed. And I think that sort of idea has only grown in the last 8 years, where I feel like it's become so stark. And immediately these two kids popped to mind, and Frankie and Bug. And I knew I wanted to tell the story looking over my shoulder, because that gives you a really good way of having that lens where young people today, it's like historical fiction, Rebecca.
Yes.
Your book from the 70s and my book from the 80s are historical fiction.
It's true.
And so that allowed me to kind of do the thing that my kids hate when I do, which is like, actually, it's hopeful because in some ways things can really change swiftly. And I was thinking about your book, the list of things that will not change, that involves a gay couple getting married. And that is, some very specific thing that did change very swiftly from when you and I were growing up, when you were either straight or you had a secret.
Right. Just the possibility
of
an actual wedding, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Why don't you take a minute and can you just quickly, for people who haven't, don't have the book in their hands yet, and hopefully you all will soon have this book in your hands. I was just actually, yes, and Politics and Prose is the place to buy it.
And down there,
I just read, I've read the whole book and in preparation, a few months ago, but then in preparation for tonight, I just read the last 4 chapters, and it's just so, and obviously I'm not going to talk about the ending, but it's beautifully layered and moving. And so can you just sort of introduce Frankie and Bug for us, and maybe read us a scene, if that works for you?
Sure. So the elevator pitch to Frankie and Bug, I guess, is that it's about these two tweens, Frankie and Bug, who sort of become reluctant friends in the summer of 1987 when they join together to investigate a serial killer who's on the loose in Los Angeles. And then when they start uncovering sort of secrets closer to home, they really wind up learning so much more about friendship and family and discrimination and love and fairness and justice and allyship. So they wind up really learning a lot about that. But when I really think about what the book is about, I tend to think about something that Bug, who's 10, her mama always says to her, which is that life isn't fair. The most you can hope for is that it's just. And at the start of the book, that's just one of those baffling things that grown-ups say when kids say, as they are wont to do, that something's not fair. But I think by the end of the book, Bug and Frankie really get a sense of what that means and how it's sort of everybody's responsibility to work to make sure that the world is more just for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it really is wonderful in the way, the way you have a very dramatic backdrop, right? Sort of the kids search for the midnight marauder. And then was that a real thing?
It was not, but it's very much based on the Night Stalker, which to people who grew up in Southern California in the 80s, this was as big as Son of Sam was here.
Which was huge for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's one of those things where everybody was talking about it for months on end. And I lived out in the suburbs, but I thought that I saw him one night peeking in my window.
Yes.
And so I kept my shades down day and night, I think, until he was captured. So
those things are so powerful. And it's genuinely scary to be a kid without a very clear sense of your place in the world. In a way, I think when you're a kid, you think you're smaller than you are, but you also maybe think that you're bigger than you are, I thought Son of Sam would be coming after me because maybe Son of Sam knew about me, which if you think about it is imagining that you're much bigger than you are. But I think that this incredible sort of super dramatic backdrop, and also just the setting, Venice Beach as a setting, which is so amazing and lovely to spend time in, it's sort of an immersion in this, exciting world where big things are happening, but then all of the, the sort of central drama is incredibly personal, and in fact, more dramatic in some ways. Like the revelations that Bug is having are more dramatic, really, than all the big stuff that's kind of like the big doings.
Yeah. I don't mean to make light of serial killers and all of that.
No.
For them, it's almost, it's so removed, right? It's removed in the way that we can put, our obsession with true crime now. Like, people are really into it. But if that actually happened, if any of those things happened to anybody you knew, it would just be grisly and you wouldn't want to go there. But it's removed.
Oh, no.
And these two kids who really think that they're going to catch a serial killer, and Bug has all of these ideas that if she catches a serial killer, they'll be heroes and they'll get like to go to Disneyland whenever they want, because that's what you really want when you're 10.
Right.
So when things come closer to home and they really have to grapple with it, it kind of really changes tenor. So
why don't you read, if you don't mind reading a bit, I would love that, because then we can just get kind of a taste.
All right, I am going to read. I'm not going to read the bit that Adam Gidwitz made me read last night, which is the pee bit. Or okay, do you want me to read the pee bit? Oh, fine, I'll read
kind
the
of too. I mean, you did it
all
for
right.
Adam.
Here's some important things you need to know. So Frankie Bug lives in Venice Beach, California, and she lives in this sort of triplex apartment. And she lives in her apartment with her mother, Mama, and her older brother, Danny, who now wants to be called Daniel, and who wants space from her. So in previous summers, Danny has taken her to the beach every day during the summer. It's Bug's favorite thing to do. And in 1987, like an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old could do that. But this year, Danny doesn't want to do any of that. And so Bug is kind of stuck not going to the beach. And she has to hang out with her downstairs neighbor, Hedvig, Hungarian refugee emigre, and her upstairs neighbor, Philip, who, she's known all her life. And then when she finds out that Philip's nephew, Frankie, is going to be coming out for the summer, Bug assumes that he's being brought out to entertain her and to replace Danny as her beach buddy, and is chagrined to discover that is not the case. Frankie is not interested in doing any of that. He doesn't even have a swimsuit with him. All he wants to do is investigate the Midnight Marauder. So after a bumpy start, Bug admits that she thinks her neighbor across the street, the hermit, is very creepy and evil. And everybody poo-poos her, but Frankie agrees. And so they start investigating him, and they do like roller skating surveillance, and they have lemonade stand stakeouts. But Frankie, as they get closer, Frankie also kind of remains a little aloof. And so right before this scene, Philip had gone away for a night, and Bug had invited Frankie to stay and do a sleepover, and instead he elected to sleep over at Hedvig's, and it really hurt Bug's feelings because Bug assumed it was all about her. And so we are taking, with the starts, the sort of morning after that sleepover didn't happen. The Midnight Marauder killed again. Mama had to work late Thursday, and Bug was told to go to Philip's for dinner. Normally, she loved going to Philip's to eat because he was such an amazing cook and often enlisted Bug as an assistant. But when she got up to his apartment, shyly knocking on the door instead of barging in like normal, Frankie was in the kitchen, pounding steak with a mallet to run through the meat grinder for hamburgers. Bug felt angry all over. Pounding the hamburger meat had always been her job. "I saw something in the hermit's window," Frankie whispered, "last night before the crime." Bug was torn. On one hand, she was mad at Frankie. On the other hand, this was pertinent information. "What did you see?" Bug asked in a non-committal voice to show she didn't care one way or another. "Lights were on and lots of movement." "How did you see all that?" She glanced at Philip to make sure he couldn't hear, but he was on the phone. She could tell by his tone he was talking to Mama. "Look." Frankie craned his head toward Philip's kitchen window and pointed just beyond the tops of the trees. You could make out one of the hermit's third-floor windows. "If you climb on the counter, you can see more. We have to do more investigating at night." "Yeah, well, if we'd had a sleepover, we could have done just that and maybe stopped a murder." Bug could not keep the hurt and anger out of her voice. Frankie must have heard it too. His nose went red and he pounded the meat with extra force. "I'm going to make lemonade," Bug announced, eager to get away from the sudden awkwardness with Frankie. "What a fine idea," Philip said, hanging up the phone. Then he smiled at Bug like she was offering something generous, which made her feel worse. She wound up making a double-sized portion, squeezing the lemons extra hard against the juicer, even though this made the motor work harder. The juice stung the cuts and hangnails that riddled her hands, but she didn't care. Let it hurt. Stupid Frankie. At dinner, she ate silently, drinking glass after glass of lemonade. What's gotten into you tonight? Philip asked. Nothing, Bug mumbled. Philip replied. She went home as soon as she finished eating. Mama was still at work. Danny was watching a rerun of Cheers. He barely said 2 words to her before going in for one of his showers. After a few minutes, the lemonade caught up with Bug and she had to pee. She knocked on the door, but Danny had locked it. Danny, hurry up. I just got in, he called. The sound of water trickling made Bug's need to pee even more urgent. She pounded on the door. I gotta go, she yelled. Bad. Tough, he said. Like emergency bad. I'm gonna pee in my pants. Just go upstairs if it's such an emergency, he said. Bug ran up the stairs to Philip's apartment and pushed open the door like normal. Philip was playing piano and he just smiled and nodded at her. Bug ran past him to the bathroom, feeling the pee dot her underwear as she reached for the doorknob, but it was also locked. She pounded on the door. I'm in here, Frankie called. I need to pee, Bug cried. But I'm in here, Frankie replied. But I need to go bad. I'll be done in a minute. It's an emergency, Bug cried. She heard the sound of the toilet flushing, but by then it was too late. The dam had burst. She had wet her pants like a baby. She stared at the mess in horror, wanting to run downstairs and hide in her bed, pretend none of this had ever happened. But just then Frankie opened the door. He took one look at Bug's wet shorts, the liquid pooling on Philip's freshly waxed floors. He got a funny expression on his face, and then he started to laugh. It was a knife straight to Bug's heart. Her so-called friend, who had slept over at Hedvig's instead of hers, was now laughing at her. I hate you, Bug cried, turning to run. Bug, wait, Frankie called after her. But she didn't wait. She ran down to her apartment and slammed the door, swearing never, ever to see Frankie again.
That's such a great scene.
So Adam asked me about that scene.
Adam is so right. I mean, yeah, it's wonderful.
Like, it's the worst. It's the worst. Like, it's embarrassing, but Bug is also, she feels like Danny's insult to her is that she's babyish, and she's trying so hard not to be babyish in so many ways in her life. And like, this is just like, oh my gosh, she's just Peter Pan's like a baby. It's mortifying. She hates Frankie. She has no idea why, what's going on. We can get at that, but I'm going to copy the idea Adam last night. I put you on the spot, Rebecca, to think if you have any crazy pee in your pants stories. And I'm going to I'll give you time to ponder, because I feel like this is really putting you on the spot. And I will tell a story that's not mine, but is my now 17-year-old daughter's story that I have permission to tell, because I have my own poop story, which I'm going to leave for the end because it's really good.
Okay. So
lying around. Yeah.
We'll save 5. How long? 5? Will that take 5 minutes?
It'll
I want to save the time.
It's a quick story.
Okay.
So my daughter's story is that she is very tight-lipped and private, a little bit like Frankie, kind of stoic. And when she was in 2nd grade, she came home one day in a terrible mood, just like something had gone on. You couldn't get it out of her. Finally, in the bath that night, it comes out like in a torrent of shameful tears that she had been at school and she had been laughing so hard she had peed her pants, which, as peeing your pants goes, is like the best way to do it, right?
It is the best way, yep.
And she was so mortified of it. She's like, I never want to speak of it again. And so we didn't for a while, but it did come up with her teacher, this wonderful teacher named Maria. And Maria was the one who told me that, yes, it had happened. And when it happened, Willa's friends gathered around her. They gave her something to tie around her waist. They like surrounded her so nobody could see, and they never spoke of it. And, I think, and I'm interested in you because you write these very complicated young people too. And we don't want to like sugarcoat and say that like young people are all perfect angels, but they really do know how to show up for each other. And that was such a small example of just like friends showing up and protecting friends and sort of being an ally of a friend in such a beautiful way. And, I thought about that a lot because in addition to, Adam being like, what's your pee in your pants story? That really, some of that comes into Frankie and Bug, who really think they learn to show up for each other.
Right. I always find it so moving. I mean, I love the way that kids can be there for one another without talking about it in the way that you just described about Willa's story, because I think there's something about like when people act in like together, I tend to feel really moved and cry. Like when people sing together, I cry. At the end of a play, when people take a bow together, I cry. And I've noticed kind of in retrospect that in a lot of my books, there's a moment where people do something to support one another or someone in particular without words. And I think it's because that is just I don't really want to take it apart, but there's something beautiful about it. There's something animal about it. And there's something like there's an instinct and it's loving, and kids are able to do that without overthinking it. And so I think I do tend to go I return to those scenes a lot because they sort of carry me. And, I'm hoping that, I don't know.
It's funny you mention that because there's a scene that I think about in When You Reach Me a lot, because to me it's such a beautiful small moment of that. And I just now realizing it also involves peeing, and also, but
yes, there is.
So I will say that there's certain books that I've returned to over and over again, and When You Reach Me to me is such like a modern classic, so much so that like in my YA novel that I'm not going to plug here, it's about an indie bookstore, and all the chapter titles are book titles, and When You Reach Me is one of the chapter titles. But there's a scene in When You Reach Me where Miranda, right? That's the main character. There's a girl there that like clearly has to pee. She's doing the pee dance, and Miranda just says like, "Do you want to go to the bathroom?" to kind of give the girl this opening. And there's a line, and I haven't read this in so long, but it's like there's the moment when you stop being mean, like
yes,
that moment made me cry so much. And it's like these little small moments of people kind of showing up for each other.
Yes, and kind of discovering this reserve from which they can draw and find generosity to other people, which I think is actually one of the best things you can do for yourself, as I have slowly learned over the years.
Yeah, no, there's like,
but you have an instinct when you're young that you have to protect yourself a lot. But in truth, it's putting yourself out there that tends to make you feel happy. But it's incredibly hard to do. It's like the world's hardest trust game, and I think that's one reason why I'm glad you're writing for middle graders. And I'm glad you've written Frankie and Bug, but I hope you'll continue to do it, because I do think you have such a good connection to that feeling, but also to the authenticity of like the darker emotions also, the anger, the jealousy, and all of that. So it's, you don't have a perfectly perfect kid.
No,
she's a moral kid, and she's interested in morality, but she has, not as an abstract idea, but she clearly is thinking about what's right, how to be, and toward the end there's a decision that has to do with a gesture that may not add up to anything but still has meaning. And that's the kind of thing that I think she's discovering over the course of the novel. And that's the kind of thing that I think readers are going to kind of exult in, I did anyway.
I hope so. And I think I'm going to stop being coy about why we read the pee scene, but giving to like the idea of Bug being flawed. She's flawed in the way that all of us are flawed. And she's flawed in the way that a lot of adults I know, where they think that like whenever another person is aloof toward them or in any which way, like not doing the thing that they want them to do, that it's about them. And so she has sort of really built this whole idea that like Frankie doesn't like her. He's her replacement, Danny. Danny rejected her. Now Frankie's rejecting her. And so after this pee scene happens, Frankie reveals to Bug that he is what today we would call a trans boy. But in 1987, there are no words for it, particularly in sort of rural Ohio where he lives. And he doesn't think there's anything wrong or right with it. He just thinks it's who he is. It's who he's always been. Right. But people around him, seem to think that this is wrong. And as soon as Bug finds out that's why he laughed, it was this nervous reaction. She's, number one, incredibly relieved. It's like oh, that's why you don't want to have the sleepover. That's why you laugh. Like, this didn't have to do with you not liking me.
Right.
And then number two is immediately accepting of this. Like, she just takes it as face value, as she would have taken any new revelation of Frankie. He likes to play Dungeons and Dragons. He has a 3-legged dog. Like, this is just part of who he is.
Right.
And then she's indignant on his behalf when she learns that people kind of mistreat him. And that opens the door for Frankie to kind of also see it with Bug, because Bug is biracial. Her father, who died before she was born, was Salvadoran, and her older brother Danny looks a lot like her father, which creates a lot of complicated feelings in Bug. On one hand, like, Danny got to know the father and looks like him, and she's so jealous of that. It's a kind of unfair that hurts to even speak of. But on the other hand, she's starting to see the world and what the kind of thing today we identify as white supremacy, and recognizing that by looking like her mother and the world perceiving her as white, it offers some protection. She sees this sort of the racist skinhead thugs hassle her brother and kind of not her. And so she's kind of grappling with this and what this means. And at one point, her Aunt Terry comes down to visit, and Aunt Terry is sort of bigoted and prejudiced toward her own family. And she's telling Bug, like, stay out of the sun. You don't want to be brown like your father and your brother. And Frankie's the one who recognizes it. And he says to her something like, oh, so you know what it's like for people to be mad at you just for being you. And the kind of simplicity of how kids sort of just see that, like, this is who you are and someone's mad at you for it. Like, you didn't do anything wrong.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think I connect so strongly with that kind of feeling and the injustice. I'm a real, I don't tolerate, I'm terrible. Like, my fourth grade, not terrible, I mean, it's not a bad thing, but my fourth grade teacher told my mom that I had an overdeveloped sense of justice. And I think that
no wonder I love you, Rebecca.
it's like a little self-righteous, annoying person, but
yeah, because you're in fourth grade, you're learning to be human.
But right, exactly. And but I feel like that is something that I have never changed. I've more grown into that sense of, it was overdeveloped maybe because I was young, but when you get older and you're like actually seeing the world and appreciating experiences and like situations that have nothing to do with you, but you're interested enough to pay attention, suddenly I think it's more like growing into a sense of injustice that is appropriately huge,
Yeah.
And it's tricky to get that, to get those little stitches into middle grade without feeling, like you're wagging your finger and telling kids, this is really the proper way to be or think, because as we know, it's not, doesn't usually make for great books, and, it's not generally persuasive because kids can't really enter into the experience when you're moralizing, or instructing. They can enter into an experience when you show them a flawed character who they can relate to, maybe not on every point, but enough, that there is some locking in and like traveling together through the story. And I think really that's one of the sort of challenges, but also great joys of writing middle grade. I mean, so you said that this book took 7 years to write. Is that because there were big changes, or is it because you were working on other contracts and it was just sort of, this was your secret project for a while? And also I'm interested in whether it felt different to write for middle graders, which I'm not assuming. I mean, but I just wonder.
It did feel different to write for middle graders in a way that I haven't fully kind of figured out yet, but it definitely did. Sort of, I felt more different writing middle grade than it did writing adult. And it took 7 years because there were big changes in the world number one. And because there was also, it took me a while to find the voice. Like in the beginning, I'm like, it was so like ponderous and lyrical, and it felt like the like adult writing about children kind of writing that I can't stand. So it took a while to really nail Bug's voice, but I think it was leaning into the flawed nature of it. And so like I grew up on those Ramona books, and I rediscovered them as an adult, reading them to my kids. And I love Ramona because she's just trying to grow up, and people are always telling her to grow up, and she's like, I'm trying. And she just messes up, but she messes up because it's hard to learn to be a person.
Yeah.
And then, just sort of all of those. So once I allowed Bug to kind of be flawed, like that really helped with the voice. But at the same time, when I started the book, it was 2013. And I knew as soon as I sat down that Frankie was trans and Philip, spoiler alert, was gay. And it was taking place in 1980s when I was coming of age against the backdrop of the AIDS crisis. And I did a lot of volunteering with AIDS Project Los Angeles when I was a teenager. And I just remember thinking if I could go back to some of those men in particular and explain and tell them how the world looked now, would they have believed me? But then the world sort of changed in terms of like trans issues really came to the fore. There were, when I started, it was before, there was Prose or books like, I don't know what Alex Gino is calling his book anymore. I know he has a new name because the original name is sort of a dead name, but trans writers writing about trans experience, TV shows, Caitlyn Jenner, and it felt like there was a conversation happening that I should not insert myself in. So I tabled the book for a while. But the other side of it was really, in terms of how things haven't changed, was looking at how we treat refugees. And Bug's father was a political refugee from El Salvador who had to leave because the repressive regime there. He was a union organizer, and he was facing prison time. And I kind of stole this story direct from one of my best friend's grandmother. And in the 80s, there was a lot of refugees coming from Central America because of these wars that were really between the United States and the Soviet Union, but were being fought by proxy in these places that completely destabilized these countries. And with the most recent sort of tide of refugees that are coming, they're coming for the same reason. Those reasons are still destabilized. And it's not like we've ever been so welcoming to them, but suddenly we were locking children in cages. And it was like, not only have things not moved forward, they've moved backwards. And so that was really what made me, after 3 or 4 years of just putting it aside, feel this kind of urgency to write it. And so with the help of like a lot of authenticity readers and sort of a lot of thought, it came to be, but it definitely took a while.
Did the book itself change as a result of the things that had changed? I mean, aside from the voice and finding the character, which I'm assuming you have to do with every book, but it's sometimes harder, sometimes less hard maybe. But do you feel like the things that were happening over those years, like, were those things directly changing the way that you were writing the story? Or like, did you have a draft and then you shifted things, or had you kind of gotten so far and stopped and now you picked up? Or maybe you don't.
No, it changed a lot. And I would say it was really the kind of the conversations about sort of allyship or co-conspiratorship, because Bug had always done these things like to help Frankie, but often she doesn't ask Frankie what Frankie wants. And it's just sort of this idea of like centering yourself and imposing that on somebody else. And one of my readers pointed that out, and I realized like that Bug was trying to be an ally to Frankie, and she was messing up, and that was important to demonstrate. It was important to demonstrate that like allyship is complicated. You have to decenter yourself. You have to ask the other person. It can lead to some uncomfortable conversations. You're going to get things wrong, but the way that they handle getting things wrong is like, there's a reaction, there's a little conversation about it, and they move on. And I think I wanted that to be like prescriptive, because we can't just be like, oh, my bad, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And we get so caught up in sort of defenses and fragility, we're not going to get anywhere. So I really did understand when I came back to write this final draft, how much it was a book about allyship.
Right. and being able to talk about the ways in which you're failing, maybe as an ally. Yeah, being open to it, but without running away, without signing off, but sort of staying in and kind of like struggling with it a bit. I mean, really, to the end, she's, I mean, a little bit trying to solve the problem, right? I mean, solve certain problems or make decisions like, oh, this would be better. This would be easier for you.
She wants it for herself.
Yeah.
And she genuinely loves Frankie. So, and at the end of the book, Mama talks about like, Bug asks if her aunt is prejudiced, and her Mama's like, everybody's prejudiced. It's just what you do with it, and you can shine a light on it and to figure out how arbitrary it all is. And one of the things I think Frankie and Bug is like they're willing to examine their stuff in an undefensive way that I think children are, and we would all do well to be able to like not freak out when we're told we've done something wrong, or oh my god, I'm not of this, and just like pause a beat, listen, and then one of my favorite sayings is the truth will set you free, and first it'll make you miserable. And that's so true in like all kinds of anti-racism or anti-homophobia work. So
completely agree.
I want to ask you a question real quick. I know we have audience questions.
Yeah, we're going to go to questions.
But I want to know, because you're When You Reach Me so famously, your other two books are set more contemporary, but When You Reach Me was set in the 70s. And I know you've talked about how that was so they could have freedom. But, isn't it just delightful to not have to like put technology in books?
It is delightful. And also, so that book it's really the year, it's Miranda's 6th grade year, but it was also the year I was in 6th grade. So that was like a little gift to myself as a writer, I think, because you get to put all those little, we all carry those million, memories, shards of things. It could be like the tile on the bathroom floor, or the feeling when you were crossing the street, or the friend who broke your heart for a while, or whatever it is that's happening. And so it sort of gave me permission to not only ditch the cell phones, but also give the kids a huge amount of freedom, because we did have that freedom at that age, at 10 and 11 in 1979, like we were just out.
Roman.
And bad things did happen sometimes. I mean, people did get stuff taken from them, and we went on, and I mean, I'm not saying it was fine exactly, but it also was not the end of the world. And it's interesting, because then watching my own kids grow up in New York, I don't know about yours, but like they didn't have a lot of that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, the city changed, and
like when they were teenagers, they did, but when they were younger,
really, yours did?
I mean, just that they were like, they go to school in a different borough, so
yeah. But I mean, my kids have never like been mugged. I mean, it happened to us over and over and over. So, but I always made sure to say to them, if you realize this is happening, like this is going to happen right now, like you're just suddenly in a situation, don't worry too much. It's going to be okay. Like you will be okay afterwards. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, particularly for children with white privilege, like it's interesting because my younger daughter's Black, and so it's a whole different sort of conversation there. And she had a period where she was really, understanding all the issues, and she wanted to know if like anytime she saw police, she was in danger. And I had to explain to her like that you have the privilege of living in a relatively affluent neighborhood, but I mean it's always an issue. So the relatively Kensington, New York, the relatively affluent neighborhood.
Absolutely.
All right, Margaret's back on. Do we have questions?
All right.
Yeah, thanks to
Margaret
both of
has
you.
come back to ask Gayle some questions.
There's some questions, and actually, Gayle, thank you for asking that question. We did have an audience question along similar lines about differences in writing kid characters set in current times versus kids from 70s and 80s. So thank you for reading the mind of one of our listeners, viewers. I do have a question from Donna that I wanted you to see if you could address. Can you talk about the sensitivity readers and how they helped you develop your characters?
For sure. Thank you. I'm so glad you asked. I feel like the conversation around sensitivity readers has sort of been skewed in that it's like, oh, these are people to make sure you don't get in trouble by getting things wrong. And absolutely, like, I come from the world of journalism. So like a fact checker for me is always like, thank goodness that there's somebody there. But I've always employed what I call authenticity readers in books, like whether it's cellists or Shakespearean actors, but you have to understand that when you are putting underrepresented or marginalized people on the page, particularly when it's different experience from you, and I am a cis white woman, so both of these kids have different experiences for me, it is essential, because what makes story great is specificity of a character and experience. And I think when you don't have that personal experience, like Rebecca was talking about how her shower looked, there's a tendency to fall back on trope and generalization. So honestly, I find that authenticity readers, in addition to helping point out blind spots that I don't know I have because they're blind spots, they deepen character. And this goes back to like earlier books, like I've Lost My Way. I had some great authenticity readers. One of the characters is queer Pakistani. And, I had based the character Haroon's mother on my friend Farah's mother. And it was her mother, but her mother still fell into that trope of like a non-working, worrying, cooking mother. And somebody pointed that out. And I then changed her and made her professional, and she was a bookkeeper. And it just expanded the character and it deepened who she was. And she didn't have much time on the page, but it really worked. So I find that's incredibly helpful. And with Frankie and Bug, I worked with one particular reader really early on in a sort of very early draft, even before I had decided to try and submit it to publishers. I had reached out to him to just be like, hey, will you take a look at this for me? And there was so much in it in terms of truly being sensitive to what trans kids today would be going through, because when you're writing historical, you have to be both like, you want to be authentic to the time, but also very aware of the sensitivities of your readers now. And he was incredible. And so he opened the book up in so many ways and sort of clarified so many things, not just about Frankie, but about Bug, about Philip, about sort of everybody in the book, and really brought me to this idea. He showed me how Bug was trying to be a good friend, but like never asked Frankie. And it was such a moment of clicking. It's like, right, this is prescriptive. Like, how do you decenter yourself when you're 10? How do you decenter yourself when you're 50? Like it's tricky to do. So I am like incredibly grateful for these readers, because it helps me to make a character so much more specific. And I think that there's no universal experience, no matter who you're writing about. So to be able to write as specific an experience as possible is incredibly helpful.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Kind of a follow-up in a way to that is, what was the most difficult part of Frankie and Bug to write?
I think it really had to do with, there's sort of violence that comes closer to home with Philip. And I have written for young people for more than 25 years now. I started out as a journalist and then I became a novelist. And every time I think, oh, a reader can't handle this, they prove me wrong. So it was really a matter of trusting and respecting a reader to be able to take this on whatever level they were at, or to put it down if they didn't want to. But I think it was showing the world as it was and as it still is in a true way, and trusting them to understand that without making it bleak. Because at the end of the day, the book is a call to action. At the end of the book, Bug is feeling a little frustrated that Frankie is going home and things have happened with Philip, and she tells Mama something doesn't feel just or fair, and Mama says sometimes justice takes time, and Bug finds that infuriating because aren't adults always telling you to wait? And Mama says something about, you know what, you're right, it's up to all of us to hurry toward justice. And so I wanted to show young people today that the world can change, and it can change with breathtaking speed, and it can also remain stuck in place and move backward. And it's up to all of us to kind of lean into it and sort of make sure we push together to make change for everyone.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Sorry. But this is something I really grappled with my last novel, which is sort of the extent to when you are showing intolerance, writing about intolerance, but bringing it to life on the page and for your readers. Is that something, did you think about where that dial should be? Because I did do that with my last book, and even though it was sort of a balance, it was that truth, hopefulness thing, in response to a reader's reaction. He just sort of felt like it was like a little too painful, and that if a reader was anticipating some pain maybe or difficulty in life, that it might feel like too much. And I did rewrite some of it for that reason. Did you think about that?
Yeah, no, there was a lot I had to dial down, and here's a big difference between YA and middle grade. Is YA, everything is dialed up, like 11, and I don't do that. I try not to do that in YA because it feels like overkill, but I just sort of think it is the age, the emotions are so big, kids want it. And here I definitely dialed it down, and I had readers at the very end talking about bits that were painful, and so I played things down, and I had other readers, I had a couple of readers who and these were trans readers who said they wanted the ending even changed because they wanted sort of more glimmers of hope and to see more queer joy. And so, there's a change. Probably you didn't see it in your version because you read the ARC, but I changed the scene at the end where Bug wants to know if Frankie can stay, and she asks Philip this time instead of Mama. And it gives so it gives Philip a chance to talk about his own life.
Oh, that's great.
He loves his life, because I think it was important for young people to see that even with hardship and even with discrimination, you can absolutely love your life, and you will find your people. And that's so much a part of this book. It's this found family where they find their people. And I have every confidence that Frankie is going to find his people and as he grows up.
And I think we feel that at the end. For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry about that, Margaret.
No, I'm so interested.
Wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked that. But our time is winding down. So I think if you wouldn't mind both of you sharing about what is next or what you're working on, if you're able to.
Right. And I owe the poop story too.
Oh yeah. Come on, Gayle. Out with it.
Go for it.
I'm working on a new middle grade novel that's also set over the course of a summer. It's set in contemporary time, and it's about a kid who goes to sort of stay with his grandfather for the first time in this kind of lake community. So that is what I'm working on, and I have on submission right now an adult book about a 105-year-old man. Takes place at an old age home, and it's his relationship with the sort of 17-year-old girl who's sort of on a court mandate to go work there. So those are the two.
That sounds so good.
So Rebecca, what about you?
Mine are, I'm actually sort of about to start revising a picture book, which is my first picture book about a girl and her dad and their first night in their new apartment. And I also am working on a sort of something completely different, which is for me, although still middle grade, which is sort of a collaborative multi-genre story that is a mystery, ghost story, animal tale, sci-fi,
Can you elaborate on what
adventure. I don't know if I can, but
I mean, I don't need to know the specifics, but it's like multiple writers and mixing genres, and
it's two writers, yeah, four points of view,
Got
and
it.
each point of view is a different
How fun
genre.
to work with another writer, though.
Yep, it is fun, and so it's a small town, a boy, a girl, a ghost, and a cat. So it's been actually joyful. Although it's about a deadly fire, but
yeah, no, you have me. I have a new puppy, so you can be sure that dogs and puppy stories are going to be, and our relationship between our puppy and our cat. Like, I'm sure I'll be writing more about that than anybody wants to know.
Oh, good.
All right, and now the promised poop story.
Yes.
Before we log off. So I was 2 or 3 years old, and my parents needed like a new washing machine or something. And back in those days, we couldn't buy them on the internet. We went to stores. And so they took us to a place called Sears, and they have all the displays, the floor models out. They also happen to have toilets out there. And I also happen to be potty training at this point. So while my parents are off looking at a washing machine, you see where this is going. I did what I was told to do. And I did my business in one of the display toilets. And then I went up to my mom and I said, it won't flush. So that's some Gayle Forman.
That is pretty great.
I think I'm gonna get a lot of mileage out of that story these days.
It's good. It's fun.
And yeah,
and it's not too gross.
No, it's not.
Which is good.
Yeah. I want to thank Politics and Prose. I just want to tell everybody, like, indie bookstores, I feel like got me through this pandemic. Books got me through this pandemic, but it was like this special kind of joy to like order my book at my tiny little local bookstore, and they didn't open for rousing until very late because it's so small, but you would call and they would like open the door and hand you the book and you'd have a little conversation. And like, it was just, in fact, I have like 2 books waiting for me that I got to go pick up. It felt like a lifeline, and I can't wait to be browsing and doing events in person. But I just want to say, like, how grateful I am for how hard you all work to kind of adapt and figure out how to do this. And we need stories more than ever. So thank you.
Couldn't agree more. No, I'm so glad that all of you are writing, and especially during this time. And we appreciate very much your words about independent bookstores. And we appreciate everyone's support. I just have to share, Gayle, that Pamela wrote in the Q&A, she says, I am sorry, I am laughing hysterically at Gayle's story. So, so there you have it. It was the way to end. But anyway, I think we are kind of winding down now. Thank you to the both of you for your wonderful conversation. And thanks, viewers, for joining us. And remember, of course, you can still click the link in the chat to purchase your copy of Frankie and Bug. And we do have the signed book plates and bookmarks. So we appreciate your support again. Please be sure to check out our website for updated event listings. And you can follow our Children and Teens Department on social media under @KidsInProse. I think that wraps up our time tonight. Thank you for joining us, and have a great night.